The only formula that I put in the book, it's the simplest that I could do, is a formula for a pretty good life is independence plus purpose. And I think it's hard to have a good, meaningful life without both of those things. The independence to be who you are and do what you want, and the purpose, the wisdom to solve interesting problems, hard problems, as you said. I think that's important. I think you need both of those to have a good life. And purpose will be different for everybody. For me, it's my kids right now. That'll change when they're on their own. For some people, it's work. Some people, it's religion. Whatever it might be, the independence to be who you are and to chase something that is bigger than yourself. Work on a problem that is bigger than yourself. You have to choose your words carefully when you say this because you can really offend a lot of people. But the average, ordinary, median, middle-class American today, earning $60,000, whatever the median income is, lives a life that would be indistinguishable from magic to somebody 100 years ago. I mean, that's true. Just the access to the simplest things that you and I never think about, Advil, sunscreen, let alone phones and the internet and whatnot, would have seemed like magic to people. It is also true, and this is the important part, it's also true that nobody wakes up thinking about how magical Advil is and how grateful we should be to live in a world that has Advil and penicillin and all this. Nobody, the speed at which a luxury becomes a necessity is 2 seconds. And you can easily imagine a world in which our grandkids live in a world that if we could get a glimpse of it, had a time machine and could see how they're living in the world 2150, be like, I can't, you guys must wake up so happy. We've cured cancer, we've done all these things, we're a multiplanetary species, whatever it might be, and they won't appreciate any of it because it'll just become a normal thing. And so that's always the case, that luxury becomes necessity very, very quickly. It's always been the case that there's no definition of wealth. There's no objective definition of wealth. The only definition that makes sense to people is relative to other people. And so it doesn't matter how much money that I have. All that matters is that I have more than you. That's always been the case. It is 100 times more potent now because of social media. So what I just said was true 100 years ago. It's true 1,000 years ago. You judge yourself relative to other people. But your comparison group now that you're comparing yourself to is a curated, algorithmic, highlighted reel of the top 1% of moments of the top 1% of people's lives globally. As an iron rule of math, half the population has to be below the median. That's just how it works. Half the population has to be below average. And when everybody, though, is being almost force-fed the top 1% of moments of the top 1% of people's lives, you create the situation where a lot of people are living good lives by any historical standard, but we've created a world where I think most people expect what is effectively a top 1% outcome. And you see this a lot with college students, where a lot of people think that the baseline norm of what they want in life is a bachelor's degree from a flagship university, a corporate job that pays low six figures to begin with, great health insurance, great retirement, a 3,000 square foot house with 2 SUVs. That's become their baseline norm of like, that's just what I expect. Anything short of that is a failure. And on one hand, I want to live in a world that has rising expectations. That's what progress is. I want to live in a world where my grandkids live in a world where cancer is cured and they don't even think about it. That's the dream. Rising expectations is progress. That's what it is. But you also have to expect and understand that in that world, that growth individually and as a whole society is never going to feel like you think it would be, because it just becomes the norm that you expect. I think for a lot of people, what they really like with money is not even being rich. It's the process of becoming rich. The change in the trajectory is way more exciting. People don't like you when you have something. They like you when you're pursuing something. What tends to be attractive are not people who have a lot of resources. It's people who have the potential to acquire future resources. I had been a full-time professional writer for 15 years before I wrote a book. And I was very comfortable in my position of where I was as a blogger, as an online writer. I felt like I had a great life, loved what I did, made enough money for my family to be totally happy and have some sense of independence. And then I wrote a book 15 years into it that I never expected to do anything, and the publisher didn't expect to do anything, but massively increased the trajectory of my career. And it felt great. It felt amazing for, I want to say, a year. And then it became, this is just where I'm at now. I think the reason happiness is a fleeting emotion, which it is, most people are never happy for more than a short period of time. it's a great emotion, but it's always fleeting, is because what makes you happy is surprise. It's experiencing something that you genuinely did not expect. And so when I had this bump in my career, there was a period of surprise. I never expected this to happen. And then after a period of time, it was like, okay, I'm used to this trajectory and this is where we're at. So I think even when you're on a higher trajectory, you can get used to it. The one career profession I think is really interesting in here is President of the United States, because you are the most powerful man in the world with anything at your fingertips. And by the beauty of democracy, it's a short-term job.
Yep.
And after being the most powerful man in the world, one day you wake up and you're just some guy named George Bush. And there's very few careers that are like that, where you are absolutely tippity top for a moment, but it's going to end. And yes, you can have book deals and speaking deals and have a good fortune, but there's going to come a specific day where nobody cares about you. If you're talking about like a businessman or an entrepreneur, you might measure their success based off of their net worth. If your favorite athlete had a gambling addiction and lost all their money, but they're still just so much fun to watch on the court, you wouldn't care that much. And there's a lot of athletes who did fit that bill. And comedians who might fit that bill. If this is not the case, but if my favorite comedian, if I found out like he hasn't figured out how to monetize it yet, and the guy's actually broke and lives in a tiny apartment, I don't care. I'm going to watch every special because I value them for something more than money. And that's true for your best friends. I wrote about this in the book. One of my best friends, I've known him for 20 years. The best guy I know. I have so much fun hanging out with this guy, and I've known him forever. And of our peer group, he makes by far the least amount of money, and it really bothers him. And he talks about how inferior he feels and whatnot. And I told him one day, I was like, if you are a funny joke teller and a good friend, you're fun to hang out with, I love our conversations, you're working hard to support your family, you're a good dad, you're a good husband, you're a good citizen. If you do those things, you've earned 90% of the points that I am willing to give anybody. If you also happen to be rich and successful, I might bump you up to like a 9.2. In some ways, this is unavoidable. So I'm not saying this is even a bad thing. It's just a real thing. But we want to think that what people admire us for is our wealth. And 90% of the time, if you run through the people who are most meaningful to you in your life, they don't value you for your wealth. And the thing that they value for has nothing to do with money. My kids don't care in the slightest whether my income went up last year or what our net worth is. They care that I listen to them and that I play football with them in the driveway and that I read books to them and that I'm a good friend. I have another friend, the same friend who gave me the tour of his very large house that was mostly not used, who said, sometimes I have days where I wish my dad was just a normal guy who drove a Subaru. That the money was getting in the way of his ability to just be a normal, good dad. And when you have that much money, it was the center of everything that they did in life, was like, how do we use our money for philanthropy and the lifestyle that we live? And he's like, sometimes I just want my dad to just go out and play baseball with me, to be a normal guy. If you've known someone who's dealt with infertility, they will do anything to have a kid. They would chop off their arms, do anything to have a baby. If you know people who have newborns, they would do anything to sleep tonight. They would chop off their arms for this kid to shut up and let me sleep. It's always the case that like the extent to which you value something, if you want something and you can't have it, you value it more than anything. When you have it, the value diminishes. And if it's taken away from you, then the perceived value goes up tremendously again. I think so much of financial advice and financial media is based off of two things. A, lectures, and B, formulas. So let me give you a lecture to tell you that what you're doing is wrong, and let me give you a formula for how to fix it. And nobody is interested in that. Nobody's interested in being told that they're living a wrong life, and nobody wants a formula that is indistinguishable from like Algebra 1 in high school kind of thing. They don't want that. What people want is advice on how you can be yourself and be independent and live a life that is true to yourself. And to learn about that, tell them a story about somebody else and how they've done it wrong or how they've done it right. I think that's what's sorely lacking in all financial education. Finance is one of very few topics that affects everybody. No matter who you are, where you're from, money will impact your life. Health is the other one. And because of that, like people have an obligation to learn about this stuff. You can go through life just fine knowing nothing about chemistry and have a great life. You cannot go through life doing okay without knowing anything about money. It's so important, but the way that it tends to be taught, I think, is completely broken. And so that's why I just want to tell silly little stories like that. Ronald Reed was a guy who was a gas station attendant and a janitor at a mall. just as humble, low-key, or dare I say like low-class, poor kind of person that you would ever meet. And when he died, he ended up leaving millions and millions of dollars to charity. And people were like, what? Like, this guy's mopping the floors and pumping gas. Like, where in the world did he get all this money? And it turned out that he took what tiny dollars he could save from his minimum wage job, and he bought stocks that he held for like 50 years and turned into millions of dollars and gave it away. But he could not have been a more ordinary kind of person. Richard could not be more polar opposite. He's born into wealth and went to Ivy League schools and worked on Wall Street and worked his way up to senior leadership on Wall Street, made tens of millions of dollars. And very soon, not that long after Ronald Read died, he filed for personal bankruptcy and just blew himself up with debt and leverage. He had a house in Florida that had multiple elevators and like a swimming pool that you could stand on top, like all these crazy things, all heavily levered. Financial crisis hits, boom, he's out, he's bankrupt. And I use that juxtaposition to be like, you don't need intelligence and connections and education and experience to do well. All you need is like a couple of behavioral attributes that Ronald Read had. Patience, low ego, that's all you need. And even if you have all of the intelligence in the world, you can go broke. I don't think Ronald Read is a role model. I think he had such a unique personality that he could have lived a much better life than he did, than living in a trailer. So someone asked after he died, one of his friends, what his hobbies were. And he said the only hobby he can think of was splitting firewood, kind of thing. So someone who has millions of dollars in the bank and is just living like that, like that's not a role model. I should point that out. But he had the psychological attributes that you need to get wealthy, of just low ego and patience, even if he took it to an extreme that I think was detrimental. And so, and again, there's very few endeavors like that. You will never meet someone who is just an uneducated country bumpkin who can do open heart surgery better than a Harvard cardiologist. That will never happen. It's impossible. But not only does it happen with money, it happens pretty often, where ordinary people with good behavior outperform extremely educated people who don't have control over their emotions. Because a lot of people think like, why would I try investing? Like, it's just a rigged game against me. And I think what's closer to the truth is that it's rigged against professionals who have to compete against each other on a 90-day clock. What were your returns last quarter and how do they rank next to your peers? That's what you live and die by. Like the game's rigged against them. But for ordinary people who are like, I'm just going to invest in my 401k and leave it alone for 30 years. I don't even know what my password is. I don't care. I don't know or care if somebody else outperformed me last quarter. I'm just going to do this and follow my goals. That's where the money's made. And so I think that's the irony, is we think it's rigged against you when it's rigged against the pros. One of the most interesting is Jesse Livermore. I wrote about him in Psychology of Money. He was the best stock trader of the 1910s, 1920s. And he was one of the only people who in the crash of 1929 was short the market and made a fortune. And actually after the crash of 1929, by most accounts, he was the richest man in the world. He made, during the crash, where everyone else was going bankrupt and literally jumping out of windows, the equivalent adjusted for inflation of like $3 billion in the crash. And he was already unbelievably wealthy. He was the best stock trader in the world. And he made and lost several fortunes. Because after every big win, when he'd make the equivalent of $3 billion, $5 billion, he would take more risk, and blow himself up. And so he went effectively bankrupt like 3 times. He went from billionaire to bankrupt over and over again, and eventually took his own life the last time he went broke. And so he's always so interesting to me, of like, nobody in the world was better at getting rich than Jesse Livermore. Literally the most talented person on earth at getting rich. And he had no ability whatsoever to stay rich. He couldn't do it. And so I think back to like the Carl Icahn, there's lots of people like that who are very good at getting rich and much less skilled at staying rich. And to do well financially, you need an element of both. And they can be conflicting personalities, of like a personality that says, I'm going to take a risk and swing for the fences and try to get this done. And I'm going to be a little bit scared and a little bit paranoid and be scared of debt. That you need both of those at the same time. And I think a lot of times with entrepreneurs and traders, they have a lot of skill in the first bucket, take enormous risks, very smart and intelligent. But the kind of personality that you need to be a billionaire hedge fund manager is not the kind of personality who also says, that's enough. Maybe I should put a bunch of money in treasury bonds and take money off the table. Like, they just don't, the kind of person. And that's why I think like Elon Musk will either be a trillionaire or bankrupt. And at this point, it's much closer to trillionaire at this point. But if you looked at him 10 years ago, when he was not the richest man in the world, you could see that. Like, this guy's either going to be the richest man in the world or he's going to go bankrupt very quickly here.